One of the most painful decisions of any parent is whether or not to put their child up for adoption. But imagine if you ended up becoming famous and had that decision to look back on for the rest of your life. Join us as we have a look at some celebrities who had to do just that. Albert Einstein. Now, Albert Einstein may have been the father of relativity, but it doesn't mean that he wanted to take on the role when it came to parenthood. Einstein was intensely dedicated to his studies, and he developed the theory of relativity, one of two pillars of modern physics alongside quantum mechanics. His work was incredibly influential, and he would receive a Nobel Prize in physics in 1921. However, Einstein also had another responsibility, though, that he pushed aside in favor of the good that he would do for the scientific community. Albert Einstein and Mileva Merrick had a child in 1902, 1 year before the parents were to be married. Lucille Einstein was her name, and while Albert worked in Switzerland, Mileva took care of the child in Serbia. Merrick would eventually join Albert without the child. It would not be until 1986 when Einstein's secret child was discovered, when letters between himself and Merrick surfaced containing information about her pregnancy. The name Lucille referring to a girl, and Hans-Searle referring to a boy. The child is first referred to in a letter in 1901, and the last reference to Lucille, or the unnamed baby girl, is in 1903, when Einstein showed concern after discovering that she was suffering from scarlet fever. He even writes to Merrick that they must, quote, take precautions so that problems don't arise for her later, which may have referred to giving her up for adoption. This is the last that we know of the baby girl until Michelle Zakheim's book entitled Einstein's Daughter is released. In the book, Zakheim theorizes that Lucille may have been developmentally disabled at birth, and the child lived with Merrick's family until she died of scarlet fever in 1903. Perhaps the most interesting thing to consider, though, is that we have no idea what actually happened to the child, and there could have been another scientific genius that was the offspring of Albert Einstein himself, who never got to live up to their full potential because of adoption. Rod Stewart. It's not really too difficult to imagine that Rod Stewart would have a child, or 2, or 10 in his younger days of being a British rock god. In fact, he had exactly 8 children with other women. But I mean, is he the only British rock singer and songwriter to be knighted at Buckingham Palace? If he can have the heart of the nation, then he can have just about anything he wants. Other than parental responsibility, that is. Stewart would reconnect with his daughter, named Sarah Streeter. Susanna Boffey and Rod Stewart met at a nightclub, and Susanna gave birth to Rod's love child, Sarah. Now, if you've ever listened to the song Brighton Beach, well, that song is about him and Susanna. Now, of course, Susanna feels that Rod romanticized what happened between them, but it does make for a lovely song. Susanna also believes that Rod abandoned the baby and her in order to continue living it up with his rock and roll lifestyle. And Susanna would be forced to give up Sarah at the age of 1 year old. She was a sickly child that spent most of her years in foster homes, being adopted by a family at the age of 5. And Stewart was wary of connecting with his daughter, mostly because of her adopted parents, but they did just recently rekindle their relationship. You have to wonder how different Rod Stewart's life would have been if he took on the role of father instead of famous rock star. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was one of the most influential and popular actors of his time, playing the lead man to famous actors like Joan Crawford, Ava Gardner, and Marilyn Monroe. He was considered one of the most consistent box office performers in history, and named the 7th greatest male star of classic American cinema. But one thing that he wasn't the leading man in was his own budding family. It would all begin when Clark Gable and Loretta Young were working on a film called The Call of the Wild. The two had an instant connection, and it resulted in the birth of Judy Lewis, Clark's secret biological daughter. In fact, it would be the only child actor had when he was alive, with his son being born 4 months after his death. However, Clark never had a relationship with Judy. Clark was married to Maria Langham at the time that he had an affair with Loretta Young, so Young agreed to conceal the pregnancy to protect both their film careers and avoid scandal. During her pregnancy, she would travel to Europe for several months at a time and then return to stay with her mother. A gossip columnist came to interview Young because word had gotten around that the actress was claiming to be ill and needed rest. She gave the interview from her bed and concealed her pregnancy under the covers, and the columnist was none the wiser. After Judy would be born, she would then be placed in an orphanage by Young and would spend 19 months in various hideaways until Young's mother could adopt 2 children. Her mother claimed to have to give one of the children back to its biological mother, and it was all a setup in order to hide the fact that Judy was actually Young and Gable's love child. Roseanne Barr. It's difficult to imagine Roseanne as being anything but incredibly honest and hilarious, but there was a time when she had an opportunity to be a mother and made the difficult decision to give up her child. It resulted in her eventual success as the lead actress in Roseanne, where she won both an Emmy and a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress. But you have to wonder if those trophies make up for what she gave away. Roseanne was just 18 years old when she decided to give her daughter up for adoption. She decided to keep the baby, but then changed her mind since it wouldn't be financially feasible. The baby was born in 1971 in a Salvation Army home for unwed mothers, and Roseanne would decide to give the child to the Jewish Family and Children's Services in Denver, Colorado. Brandy Brown was reunited with her mother at the age of 17, but prior to that, Roseanne had no knowledge of her whereabouts, and it was an unknown tabloid that would give her clues to locate the girl. It's really hard to imagine Roseanne as being anything but snarky and truthful from her show, and we're sure that one of the few times she was purely happy was after being reconnected with her daughter. Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell is one of the most influential female recording artists of the 20th century, and if she wouldn't have given up a child young, this title might not have been lived by the amazing singer-songwriter. Joni uses a combination of folk, pop, rock, and jazz to reflect on social and environmental ideals, and her brains are as prominent as her amazing voice in her music. So it leaves you to wonder how much a baby would have affected Joni's life as a musician. Before becoming Joni Mitchell, she was Joan Anderson, an unknown and extremely poor folk singer that lived in Toronto. The father of her child was Brad McMath, and as the song Little Green would suggest, he ran out on her, stating that he disappeared to California, hearing everything was warmer there. Joni would try to marry a fellow folk singer by the name of Chuck Mitchell, but the relationship would quickly collapse, and Joni would keep the surname Mitchell. The baby would then be given up for adoption, named Kelly for the color green, and then her name would be changed after 2 teachers adopted her. The baby would grow up going to the best private schools and traveling to exotic places with her parents, and she even became a fashion model. Everything that Joni could ever ask for, since she could not raise the child herself. This terribly difficult decision made for some amazing music from the folk singer. Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman was a guy that appreciated a good joke, but even though Kaufman was often referred to as a comedian, he liked to remind people that he was a song and dance man, and he was certainly not a family man. He would not have what you would consider a standard dad humor. In fact, it was discovered that Andy had actually turned away from fatherhood at an early age. At the end of his high school career, Andy would turn to partying to make it through school and got his 17-year-old girlfriend, Gloria, pregnant when he was 19. He then decided to get his life together and attend junior college in Boston in order to get an associate in arts and television. While he was at school, his daughter was born, and he never got to see the baby. She was put up for adoption, and he died before she discovered who her biological father really was. Although his death was rumored to be a hoax, since Andy loved to play practical jokes and had a bizarre sense of humor that's worthy of its own cult following. Linda Lovelace. Linda Lovelace was an adult film star, but she didn't feel that she was quite ready to take on the parental responsibility at a young age. Instead, she chose to become part of the sexual revolution of the 1970s, along with the porn industry. Linda was famous for her role in the 1972 film Deep Throat, but it would be discovered later on that she had an abusive husband who threatened and coerced her into performance. Linda became pregnant at 19 years old, and her mother forced her to give up the child for adoption. She then moved from Florida to New York soon afterward to study computing, but was injured in a car accident that would affect her for the rest of her life. Later on in life, Linda would become a born-again Christian and also a spokeswoman for the anti-pornography movement, proving just how important the decision to give up her child was. If she had not done so, she would probably have remained in Florida as a young single mother and not been forced to become a porn star by an abusive husband. It just proves that not all adoption stories have happy endings. Hannah Taylor was just 5 years old when she saw a man eating out of a garbage can one winter day. That's when young Hannah was immediately filled with questions. She knew that it wasn't right. Even at such a young age, she knew that if everyone shared what they had, they could cure homelessness. And then, by the age of just 8 years old, Hannah had founded the charity, the Ladybug Foundation Incorporated. She spoke out